Hey, this is Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Today I'm going to show you how to install a Tusk electronic power steering kit on your Polaris RZR 800. If your side-by-side didn't come with power steering, then this kit is going to be a serious upgrade for you. It's going to make your driving experience much more enjoyable, and it's going to work for pretty much any style of driving. Especially if you're doing any slow speed driving like rock crawling, the difference will be night and day. Now, some of the other reasons people like power steering on their side-by-sides are it helps reduce unwanted feedback through the steering wheel and steering wheel jerk. It's going to give you a better overall control of the vehicle and will help reduce driver fatigue. Those are the benefits of having the power steering, and as far as installation goes, this process will be similar for the 570 and 800 RZRs. It's a bolt-on kit, and we're going to show you how to do it on a 2010 Polaris RZR S800. Now, as far as parts go, we're using the Tusk electronic power steering kit. We have our hardware here, wiring harness, our ECU. We have the electronic motor, some steering shafts, and a mounting plate. Now, the stuff on the side, this is additional, so we're going to use zip ties to tie down our wiring harness. You don't have to use dielectric grease, but you can if you want. We have electrical tape, some Loctite, and some anti-seize, and optionally, you can use some rubber gloves. To do this job, we're going to use some safety glasses, rags, penetrating lube, a pink pen, and some common hand tools, including a hammer, Allen keys, some sockets. These are going to be 24, 17, 13, and 10 millimeter, and then T25, 27, and 30 bits, Torx bits. And we also have combo wrenches, a torque wrench, side cutters, pliers, test light, some screwdrivers, and some impact guns. Before we begin the install process, you'll want to refer to your model-specific service manual along with the instructions that came in your kit to get familiar with the install process. So what we're going to do is remove our seats, center console, the hood, and the storage compartment under the hood. Next, we need to disconnect our steering shaft from our gearbox. So we're going to remove this bolt that's at the bottom of the U-joint. All right, next we're going to take a 24 millimeter socket on our impact gun, and we're going to loosen that nut up. You want to leave half the threads still on the shaft for now. And then from here, what we can do, since the steering wheel is pressed on, we're going to hit this nut with a hammer and pull up on the steering wheel, and it's going to pop it off. Now on the back of the steering wheel, you're going to have a couple of little rubber bushings and a washer. Make sure you don't lose those. And then there's also going to be a collar. So we'll go ahead and remove that. And at this point, we need to remove this bolt that is on our tilt shock, and then these two bolts each side on this pivot arm. So now we can move this pivot tube or pivot arm. And when you do this, make sure you look for this collar, and you have a couple of washers down at the bottom. Make sure you don't lose those. And then we're going to remove this steering shaft as an assembly. Now again, if you have trouble with this end sticking, we actually spread a little bit of penetrating oil on there, but you can also use a pry bar and spread this end on that yoke out just a little bit. Next, with these steering shafts, this upper steering shaft, we have some adjustability in it, so we're going to leave this bolt loose for now. This lower steering shaft, again, we have adjustability. This adjustable end is going to go towards that motor, and this end is going to go down towards our gearbox. Now with this, what I want to point out, we're going to remove this bolt all the way. We'll also put some anti-seize on these splines, and you can see these are indexed. So there's one spot where this is missing a few splines. You want to line that up with the gearbox, and it's going to have some similar looking splines like that. Make sure that's lined up when you go back together. Now I'm going to use our paint pen and mark where these splines need to line up at. Now we can install and tighten our bolt. The next step is to get our mounting brackets installed onto this motor. So what we're going to do, we've got the larger bracket, and this corner is going to be facing up towards our steering wheel. So in the hardware, we had 3 bigger bolts. Thread those in right here, and we're going to leave them loose. That way we have a little bit of adjustability. All right, now we'll take the smaller bracket, and this one's actually going to sit behind our first larger bracket. How it sits in there, you're going to have these tabs opposite of each other, and these arms, they're going to be facing the steering wheel. So at that point, we can take our mounting hardware. So we have these black bolts with the washers, and we're going to loosely mount 2 of these, and then we'll put a washer and a nut on the back side. Now that we have this assembly loosely together, we're going to bring it over to the machine. We're going to use the tilt shock lower mounting bolt. That's going to go in this corner. And then we have 2 other bolts that came in our hardware kit. We're going to use these with the washers and nuts, and we're going to use these 2 mounting locations right here. So right here in the frame we have 2 bolt holes, and then you'll notice the bracket is on the right hand side of that bar coming across on the frame. The next step, we're going to install this pivot shock and install this bolt through our new bracket. Now for the upper steering shaft, again, we'll apply some anti-seize to these splines, and then we'll install the universal joint onto our motor. Once that's in place, we can loosely install the mounting bolt. Next, we're going to remove the bolt from our universal joint. Then we're going to apply a little bit of anti-seize to these splines, and we'll go ahead and install the steering shaft onto the motor and install the bolt. All right, the next step, I'm applying a little bit of grease to this shaft right here, and that way the inner race of those bearings on our tilt arm, they won't seize to it. And then what I'm going to do is take the 2 washers and that spacer that we removed earlier, put those in place. Then we'll take this tilt arm, slide it all the way down, then we'll put this into place right in between those 2 bushings and install the bolts. All right, next we have that U-joint that slides up and down up here as well. So later on, you're going to want to tighten those bolts down. But for now, we're just going to connect this tilt shock. So we'll go ahead and install this bolt. All right, the next step is to install the steering wheel. So we have our collar, we'll set that back in place, and our washer, those couple bushings. Now keep in mind, this is where it's really important to make sure that your wheels are perfectly straightforward still and they didn't move. If they did and you go ride this, there's a chance you might have to pull the steering wheel back off and relocate it. The center bar, it's going to be facing the ground. So if all that's perfectly centered up, then you can go ahead and install the nut. Now for the steering shaft nut, I've made sure the threads are clean. The threads are also clean on the shaft. We're going to apply some medium strength thread lock to these just to make sure this thing doesn't come off. And then this thing, it's going to get torqued to 28 foot-pounds. And once you've torqued it, after your first ride, it's a good idea to pop this cover off, make sure nothing's loosened up. At this point, we're ready to start tightening everything down, but as you can see, you have quite a bit of adjustability with this. So you want to mount these brackets in the best position possible. So obviously you want the steering shaft away from the pedals, and then the steering motor, if it's too far up, you're going to be running into things. Just make sure you have a little bit of clearance on both sides of this motor. All right, at this point we have 5 bolts on the steering shaft that we need to tighten down. We already tightened the lower one on the gearbox, so we'll go ahead and work our way up. Now we'll go ahead and snap our cover on the steering wheel. The next step is to install the control unit for the power steering. Now, I'm showing you this out here because it's really hard to see up under this dash, but underneath the dash, you have a bar with a couple of holes in it on the frame, and this unit is going to go on top of that bar with the electrical connectors facing this way. And then on the bottom of this, you have 2 mounting bolts. So you're going to take this bracket and you'll set it underneath the frame where those 2 holes are. line up the 2 remaining bolts that came in the hardware pack with their washers. All right, wiring is one of those things where you're pretty much going to choose your own adventure, but there are a few rules you need to keep in mind. So this is the harness that came with our kit. This white wire is going to go to a key-on power. So if you have a bus bar, that's a great location for this. Or if you don't have a bus bar, if you go to that 12-volt accessory plug, you can splice this into one of those wires using this adapter that came in the kit, or this tap. And then these 2 wires, red and black, these are going to go directly to your battery. So you need to route them all the way to the back. Doesn't matter what way you choose to route these. All that matters is that they stay away from rotating parts, sharp edges, or anything that's hot that could burn or possibly damage these. Other than that, all the connectors, so these connectors, they're all different, and they just plug into this ECU for the power steering unit. And this light right here, this is for diagnostics. You really don't need to worry about that right now. So other than that, there's 2 wires coming from the power steering unit, and we're going to plug those into the ECU as well. Again, they're all different connectors, so you can't get those screwed up. So once you have everything routed, all you need to do is tie everything down with zip ties, and then once we're to that point, we'll start with reassembly. Now for the main harness, I'm going to start with it in the cab. I'm going to connect these 2 connectors to the ECU and keep the white wire in here. We are going to that 12-volt accessory power since we don't have a bus bar on this machine. And then I'm going to run the rest of this wiring harness and follow the stock wiring harness all the way back to the battery. And I am following that stock wiring harness, but I'm going to go to the left side of this frame tube, and that way I stay away from the steering shaft. All right, these are the wires coming from the power steering motor. I've already removed the rubber band that holds them in place, so I'm just going to route them up and over towards the control unit, just out of the way of that steering shaft. And I'll go ahead and plug them in. Now again, it is a good idea to use a little bit of dielectric grease on these connectors. And now we can poke these power wires through the firewall next to the existing wire harness. And now we'll go ahead and make our connections at the battery. So first I'm going to disconnect the negative cable. Now we'll connect our wire to the positive terminal. And then we'll reconnect the wires at the negative terminal. Next step, we need to find key on power. So I have our test light. So to check for key on power, you can probe the wire, or I can see the terminal. I'm just going to set my light on the end of that terminal, turn the key on, and we have power. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim any excess off this white wire. Once that is cut, I'm actually going to tap into this second key on power, and that way if we tap it, we can still use this electrical connector for something else. And this is just going to be a really easy way to get it done. We're going to turn our key on, make sure this thing's working, and if it is, we'll go ahead and tie down the harness. All right, now that we know everything works good, we're going to go ahead and tie our wiring harness down using some zip ties. If for some reason your power steering doesn't work when you turn the key on, then you want to go back through, check your work, make sure that all of the connections are correct. Once you have all of your wires tied down, all you have left to do is reinstall your body panels and your seats. And that's all there is to installing the Tusk electronic power steering kit on your RZR 800. If you need this kit or any other parts for your machine, be sure to check out our website. We offer free shipping on orders over $75. And for more helpful content, subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.